If you want to know what panic looks like, don't look at the stock market tickers. Look at the mining boardrooms in Toronto and London right now. Something fundamental has shifted. For decades, the global mining industry has operated on a very specific assumption that Africa is a place where you take things from. You fly in, you bribe the right minister, you sign a contract that gives you a 90% tax holiday, you dig up the wealth, and you fly it out. But last week, Mali dropped a hammer on that entire model, and the echo is going to be felt for decades. The government in Bamako has officially launched SOPAMIM. Now, if you read the Western financial press, they'll tell you this is just another state-owned enterprise, a bureaucratic shuffle, a risk factor, but they are missing the point, intentionally. SOPAMIM is not just a company. It is the structural dismantling of the colonial extraction model. It is the institutionalization of a very simple, very dangerous idea. The gold stays in the ground until the terms benefit the people walking on top of it. And Mali is not doing this alone. From Ouagadougou to Niamey, the Sahel is building a united front to take back what was always theirs. Today, we are going to talk about the sovereignty premium. We are going to look at the receipts. We're going to talk about why a Canadian CEO had an arrest warrant with his name on it, why production is down but revenue is up, and why the era of free lunch in Africa is officially over, the rent is due, and the landlord is finally home. To understand why this is such a shock to the system, you have to understand how the game was played before 2023. Mali is Africa's third largest gold producer. It sits on some of the richest mineral deposits on Earth. Gold, lithium, uranium. This is wealth that should have transformed the lives of everyday Malians generations ago, but it didn't. Why? Because the contracts were rigged. For decades, companies like Barrick Gold, B2 Gold, and Resolute Mining operated under mining codes that were often written by World Bank consultants, not Malian patriots. These codes were designed to attract foreign direct investment at any cost. The logic was, we have to be competitive. And competitive meant giving away the store. Companies got massive tax exemptions. They paid peanuts in royalties, sometimes as low as 3%. They had no obligation to hire local engineers or use local banks. They could declare losses in Mali while posting record profits in Canada, using creative accounting to make sure the Malian treasury remained empty. The result? Mali exported billions of dollars in gold, and the communities living next to the mines were left with cyanide in their water, dust in their lungs, and poverty in their pockets. The investors got the dividends. The locals got the craters. But in August 2023, the military government in Bamako decided they were done asking nicely. They introduced a new mining code, and this wasn't a tweak, it was a revolution. Let's look at the fine print of this new law, because the devil is in the details. Under the old system, the state of Mali usually held a maximum stake of 20% in a mine. The new code pushed that to 35%. Here is how that math works. 1. The state gets a 10% free carried interest. That's their share just for being the sovereign power. 2. The state has the option to buy another 20% cash interest. 3. And crucially, 5% must be sold to local Malian investors. That means over 1/3 of every new mining project is owned by Mali. But they didn't stop at ownership. They went after the supply chain. Mining is an expensive business. You need trucks, fuel, catering, construction, insurance. In the past, foreign miners would contract all of this out to foreign subsidiaries, a French catering company, a British logistics firm. The money would leave the mine and immediately leave the country. The new local content law says no. It mandates that 35% of all subcontracting must go to Malian companies. They created an online database to track every single contract. If you need a truck repaired, you better find a mechanic in Bamako, not fly a team in from Johannesburg. And perhaps the most radical change? They abolished the stability clauses that locked in tax rates for 30 years. They said, if the price of gold goes up, our cut goes up. They also implemented a levy of 0.75% of quarterly revenue to go straight into a local development fund. Not to the central treasury, but to the communities hosting the mines. The Western analysts predicted disaster. They said capital would flee. They said production would collapse. They said Mali was shooting itself in the foot. Well, the results are in, and they are embarrassing for the analysts. In 2024, Mali's industrial gold production actually dropped. It fell by roughly 23%, down to about 51 tons. If you only looked at that number, you'd think the critics were right. See, the mines are slowing down, but look at the bank account. In that same period, state revenues from the mining sector surged by 52.5%. Mali jumped from earning roughly $665 million to over $1.4 billion. Let that sink in for a second. They dug up less gold, they exported less product, but they made double the money. How is that possible? It's called the sovereignty premium. It's what happens when you actually audit the books. It's what happens when you stop letting companies declare fake losses. It's what happens when you enforce the law. The effectiveness of this strategy was proven in December 2024. The Malian government announced they had recovered 761 billion CFA francs, that's about 1.2 billion US dollars, in unpaid revenues from the mining companies. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a sector-wide reckoning. The government hired auditors. They went through years of financial records and they found the gaps. And here is the beautiful part. They didn't just hoard that cash. $554 million of that recovered money went immediately to pay domestic service providers. They cleared the internal debts. They pumped that money right back into the Malian economy. This creates a positive feedback loop. The government gets paid, the local businesses get paid, the economy stabilizes, and the foreign miners realize that if they want access to the gold, they have to pay the real price. But not everyone went quietly. The biggest test of this new reality came from Barrick Gold. Barrick is a giant. They are the second largest gold miner in the world. Their Loulo-Gounkoto complex in Mali is a monster asset, generating nearly $1 billion a year in revenue. When Mali demanded their back taxes and told them to migrate to the new mining code, Barrick pushed back. They are used to being the biggest fish in the pond. They are used to African governments folding when the pressure gets high. So, a difference of opinion opened up. Barrick refused to pay what Mali said they owed. Mali's response was cold and calculated. First, they blocked gold exports. Then, in late 2025, they seized 3 metric tons of gold produced at the Loulo mine. When Barrick still didn't pay, Mali arrested 4 senior executives. They put them in jail. And then, they dropped the nuclear option. They issued an arrest warrant for the CEO himself, Mark Bristow. Mark Bristow is a man who is used to being treated like a head of state. He flies in on private jets, meets with presidents, and lectures them on investment climates. The idea that a Malian court would issue a warrant for his arrest on charges of money laundering and financial crimes, it was unthinkable in the old world. The Western media went into overdrive. They called it hostage diplomacy. They called it extortion. But Mali didn't blink. They threatened to revoke the mining permit entirely and hand it to a Russian or Chinese operator. And guess what happened? Barrick settled. They agreed to pay $430 million. That is 244 billion CFA francs. They paid 144 billion immediately up front. They agreed to migrate to the new mining code. The lesson was brutal and clear. You are not in charge here anymore. The company exists because the state allows it to exist. This victory against Barrick wasn't just a one-off raid. It was part of a larger strategy to build institutions that can last. This is where SOPAMIM comes in. To understand SOPAMIM, you have to look at the other company Mali created in 2022, SOREM. SOREM is the explorer. Its job is to go out into the desert, drill the holes, find the gold, and map the resources. This breaks the monopoly of foreign knowledge. In the past, only the foreign companies knew where the gold really was. Now the state knows. SOPAMIM is the manager. Its job is to hold the state's equity. Before SOPAMIM, the state's 20% stake in a mine was managed by the Ministry of Mines. It was bureaucratic. It was slow. Now SOPAMIM acts like a private equity firm owned by the government. It holds the shares, it collects the dividends, it sits on the board of directors of these joint ventures, it hires financial experts who can read a balance sheet, as well as the guys from London. SOPAMIM allows the Malian government to be an active participant in the business, not just a passive tax collector. It professionalizes the management of national wealth. This is the difference between resource nationalism as a slogan and resource sovereignty as a technical practice. It's not just speeches, it's spreadsheets. Mali is the tip of the spear, but the shaft is the entire Sahel. Look at Burkina Faso. President Ibrahim Traoré watched what was happening in Bamako and took notes. He famously said, "We are going to get our mining licenses back and we are going to mine it ourselves." And he wasn't joking. Burkina Faso moved to nationalize the Bungu and Waknion gold mines. These were owned by Endeavour Mining, a UK-based firm. Endeavour had sold these mines to a company called Lilium, but the deal got messy. There were accusations of hidden financial information and missed payments. The Burkinabe government stepped in and effectively seized the assets. They nationalized them for about $80 million, a fraction of the $300 million valuation Endeavour had placed on them. Traoré's government also seized 200 kilograms of gold directly from a mine subsidiary under a decree of public necessity. They are currently building the country's first gold refinery in Ouagadougou so they can stop shipping raw earth to Switzerland. Then look at Niger. Niger supplies a massive chunk of the uranium that powers France's nuclear power plants. For decades, the French company Orano operated there like a state within a state. After the coup in 2023, the new government in Niamey looked at the contracts. They saw that the Imararan mine, one of the largest uranium deposits in the world, had been sitting undeveloped for years while Orano sat on the license. So, in June 2024, Niger revoked Orano's operating license for Imararan. They kicked them out. Orano is now trying to sue in international arbitration courts, but Niger doesn't care. They have already opened talks with Russian and Turkish firms to develop the mine. They raised the price of uranium exports. They told the French, "If you want the yellow cake, you pay the market price. No more colonial discounts." Now we have to talk about the elephant in the room. How are these countries getting away with this? Why haven't they been crushed by sanctions or military interventions? The answer is options. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger form the Alliance of Sahel states. They realize that individually they are weak, but together they control a massive strategic corridor of Africa. And they have pivoted away from the West. They kicked out French troops. They kicked out American drone bases. They opened the door to Russia for security. They opened the door to China for infrastructure. They opened the door to Turkey for drones. The Western narrative is that they are just trading one master for another, that they are becoming puppets of Putin. But that is a lazy analysis. When you have one buyer for your goods, you have zero leverage. When you have 2 or 3 buyers, you have a bidding war. By diversifying their partners, the Sahel states have created leverage. When Barrick Gold knows that a Russian company is willing to take over the mine tomorrow, Barrick has to negotiate. When France knows that China will buy the uranium, France has to pay more. This isn't about replacing Western influence with Eastern influence. It's about using the competition between East and West to create space for African sovereignty. It is a dangerous game. It requires incredible skill to balance these powers, but for the first time in history, these nations are playing the game rather than just being the board the game is played on. So, what are we really witnessing here? We are seeing the end of the patient Africa. For 60 years, African nations were told to be patient, to follow the World Bank's rules, to be investor-friendly, to wait for the wealth to trickle down. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have looked at the last 60 years and realized that the wealth doesn't trickle down, it flows out. The creation of SOPAMIM, the nationalization of mines, the revocation of licenses. This is the infrastructure of no. It is the ability to say no to a bad deal, no to a predatory investor, no to a former colonizer. Is it risky? Absolutely. We are already seeing the pushback. There are reports of terrorist spikes that suspiciously coincide with mining disputes. There are economic sanctions. There is a propaganda war, but the direction of travel is irreversible. Once a population sees that their government can stand up to a global giant and win, once they see that revenue can jump 50% just by enforcing the law, once they realize that the poverty they live in was a policy choice made by foreigners, there is no going back. Mali has shown what is possible when you treat sovereignty not as a flag or an anthem, but as a material practice. When you build the institutions to defend your wealth, the boardrooms in London and Toronto are right to be panicked. They should be, because for the first time in a long time, the rent is due, and Africa is collecting.